Welcome everybody. This video is showing how to set up the VirtualBox programming language machine that I promised during my programming languages presentation at Mesa Community College. So what you want to do to get started is go to virtualbox.org and click the download button. You could see which host that is your operating system that it supports. I do apologize to Mac users that have the M1 or M2 CPU. I do know that VirtualBox is currently working on getting the compatibility with that working, but for now it's not supported on the Mac OS Apple Silicon chips. So once you have that downloaded, you'll want to also click on the link that is in the Discord. That will get you this Arch Programming OVA virtual machine file. So once you have both of those, you want to make sure that this is in a directory that you could easily get to. You'll want to open up VirtualBox, so let me do that on mine. I'm sure on your GUI you'll have a clickable icon. But what you want to do, let me remove this one, that's the old one, is once you open up VirtualBox, you probably won't have an import and export button up here. If you do, great, click on the import one. If not, head over to File and do Import Applications, and then go to where you saved it. I saved it in my documents, and you're just going to open that up and then hit Next. I currently have this VirtualBox to run on 2 threads and 2 gigs of RAM. If you double click on these, you can increase those. I do not recommend decreasing those on this. And then here is the virtual disk hard drive. Right now, this machine only takes up about 14 gigs. Do remember this is an entire operating system with a lot of extra stuff. But if you would like, you can increase this to go higher. Currently the max on this is 20, but if you want, you can look up a video on how to extend that. I don't recommend dropping it from 20 that much. The lowest I would go is 16 gigs. If you want to download everything that I talk about in the Start Here file, you would want to go up to probably 30, and if you want to be safe, if you're doing a lot of data science stuff, I would go up to 50. So you're just going to hit Next here, and then it's going to import this appliance. Since this is the same virtual machine, I'm actually just going to close this one out and then start this one up. So when you're in here, what you want to do is you want to click in this box and hit Enter. And if you don't hit Enter quick enough, that's fine. It's going to take you to the same exact screen. And you're going to log in as the Arch user, and the password is PASS, that's pass. And when you get here, what you want to do is hold down the right control key on your keyboard and then hit F to make it full screen. And then you want to close this out. So this is the awesome window manager. If you would like to make this full screen 1080p, what you want to do is hit Control and then Enter, which will pop up a terminal. Or excuse me, not Control. You want to do the Super key, which is the Windows key on a Windows keyboard, or the Command key on a Mac keyboard. I apologize about that. And then you want to type in XR, and then when you see this virtual text come up, that's this gray text to the right, you want to hit the right arrow key and then hit Enter. So that will make it full screen. If you want to change it to an even bigger resolution, all you have to do is change the 1920 by 1080 at the end there to fit whatever resolution you want to use. So once we're here, this is the awesome window manager, which is what you're seeing here, is actually a tiling window manager. So if you would like a tiling layout versus the floating layout indicated here, you want to hold down the Super key, which again is your operating system key, so either the Windows key or the Command key. and then space, and that will get it in this tiling layout. So what a tiling layout does is that when you spawn new windows, they'll tile perfectly so that you don't have to resize them. I personally enjoy using that more than floating, so I'll stick with that. Another thing you want to be aware of is that if you want to launch the browser, the internet browser on here, what you want to do is hold the super key down and then R. You'll see this little run prompt come up, and then you want to type in Brave, which is the Brave browser, and hit enter. So you'll see that it's spawned on tag 2 here. To get to a different tab, you could either click, or you could hold the super key and a number down, and that will bring you there. If you want to move this window to a different tab, what you would do is hold down the super key, shift, and then a number. So I'll send this to tab 4, and then I'll jump to tab 4 just to show you it's there. And then if you want to close a window, you just want to hold the super key. You want to also hold down the shift key and then C to close. So we'll close all of that, and then I'll jump back to the first window. So there is a starting document in the home directory, which is where we're at now. That's where you'll always start. If you type in LL and then enter, you can see everything here that's in this main directory. And right here I have a start here file. To open that up, I am going to use NeoVim, but just to show you your two alternatives, if you want a little bit easier command line text editor to view this in, you could do nano and then type in start here. You could hit the tab key to autocomplete, and nano gives you all these commands at the bottom. So if you want to exit, you could do Control X. The little caret, which is Shift C or Shift 6 and X, that is the Control X key. If you want a GUI, you could also spawn code, which is VS code. I do have the defaults on here, so nothing is actually set up yet. So you could choose all this and then pick whatever preferences you want and then open a file. I do not recommend keeping code on here for long. I actually recommend uninstalling it as quickly as possible because it both takes up a lot of space and it's not really going to teach you a lot about the Linux way to do things. So if you're ever on a server, you're probably not going to have VS Code. So it's a lot better to learn either Nano, Emacs, which is not on here, or Vim, which I have NeoVim, and that's what I'll show you now. So let's close this out with SUPER+Shift-C. So I'll do NeoVim, which is nvim on the command line, and then the start here file. And here I just explain how to use this virtual machine and a little bit extra Linux stuff, and then all the programming languages that you could use on here. So it starts with a welcome, so anything in blue is a header. If you see the purple stuff, that normally doesn't matter. It's either quotes, double or single, and sometimes they make sense, like this pipe here or this Pac-Man here, and other times they make no sense, like this you'd need to get started. That's just a quirk of not having something else set up because I didn't want to overload the virtual machine right off the bat. So we've got a welcome section here, packages installed, so I go over the explicitly installed packages that are on here that I chose. So you've got the awesome window manager, that's what we're using now. We've got NeoVim, which is a text editor for the command line. We've got Visual Studio Code so that you could have an IDE and learn a little bit about Linux without having to use the terminal right away. I've got Bash and ZSH. If you notice that when we're on the command line, when I type in a command that actually is recognizable, it turns green, and if I typed in something that wasn't recognizable, it would be red. So that's what ZSH is doing, and Bash is obviously the scripting language that is used on Linux. GCC is the GNU compiler collection, and it will help you compile your C or C++ code for now. You can get other extensions for GCC to do Go, Ada, Fortran, and a couple other languages, but GCC is actually required by the system to install important packages. Lua and LuaJIT. Lua is the programming language of both AwesomeWM and NeoVim. LuaJIT specifically is used in NeoVim, which is just a different compiler version of Lua. Both are fantastic, and I would highly recommend checking out both to start learning to program. As you saw, we had the Brave browser. I have a nerd font on here, so I know you've most likely seen these little boxes. That's when a glyph cannot render properly because you don't have the fonts on there. So I've downloaded Fira Mono nerd font and a couple other supporting fonts, so hopefully you don't see symbols like this when you're out and about or trying to program something with UTF-8 support. That's just a bigger character set than ASCII, which is what you're probably used to. It also allows you to program with emojis, but that's what these fonts are for. And then there's starships. So let me go out of here real quick. So if you see this green arrow and the blue tilde, that is part of Starship. And you can also see it shows how long I've spent using a program. So we were just in NeoVim for 1 minute and 39 seconds. That's also Starship. If I take you to the programming and C directory, you'll see that it shows the language that we're currently using in this directory, which is C, and that it also shows the version in which compiler, which is a nice C feature. If I go out of there and go to the Python, you can see that we've got the Python logo and which version of Python we're currently using. That will hopefully work for almost every single language. I do know one language it doesn't work for is Prolog, which is a little sad, but hopefully every other language works for you. Just to show you that if you're in here and let's say we put in a Haskell file, which ends in a .h file extension, this should include both of them. So we've got the Haskell logo here and the Python logo here. So I'll remove that Haskell and let's jump back to the start here. So that's Starship. That gives you those nice features so you kind of know what you're doing. Python is also on here. It's an Arch Linux requirement. And I also put pipenv, which is the pip package manager for Python, but it creates virtual machines for you. I highly recommend reading up on pipenv if you're going to download packages, especially ones for data science. I do give an example of how to use it later in this document, but you definitely don't want to use pip. In fact, I don't think Arch Linux lets you use pip at all. I think you are forced to use pipenv, and I do give documentation on how to use it. So check that out on the wiki. And then finally, Perl is on here. Perl is another requirement for Arch Linux. There are a bunch of other packages, but those are not something that you should be concerned with. So now this section, the install section, is how you can install new packages or uninstall packages you don't want. So let's say you didn't want VS Code. It should show you right here that you could remove code by typing pacman-rs code. If you get an error, you want to use sudo at the beginning. So right here you'll see sudo pacman-syu, that's to install. Sudo just means you're doing it basically as an administrator. Sudo is do as super user. Super user is just the administrator lingo for Linux. I also show you how to download a package from the AUR, which is community packages that volunteers have put together. It's a little bit different than using Pacman, which is Arch's package manager, but it's not too complicated, and I give you all the instructions here. For non-programming language stuff that you would probably want to use this VM to learn with, I do have NeoVim resources, Linux resources, and AwesomeWM resources. Feel free to check those out. Always check out the Arch Wiki because that is one of the Bibles for Linux studying. But let's move on to what you probably downloaded this for. So I have this programming language section, and it's split up into two main sections. We have the pre-installed languages and compilers, and then we have the ones that you're going to have to do a little bit extra. So that starts here, languages that are not currently installed. In the languages that are installed, which are C, C++, Python, Lua, and Perl, I give you how to compile and run a program if you have to compile it. Sometimes you don't. And then I also give you resources. Resources are in every single language except the very last miscellaneous languages. But these resources are books or video series that I've personally watched or read and I think are really good, or they're recommended by people that are really good in that language, so I trust those resources. So we've got C, Lua, Python, Perl, and then HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are not technically downloaded, but if you have a web browser, you automatically have access to these languages, so you could run HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files within the Brave browser. If you want to do server-side stuff with JavaScript, you have to install Node, Bun, or some other backend, and I give you instructions on how to do that. So for languages that are somewhat easy to install, there's Java, Haskell, Rust, Julia. I do want to make a note on these three languages specifically, Julia, Rust, and Haskell. Because of oddities in Arch Linux, you actually want to download these languages using a different resource other than the Pacman package manager. You want to run these commands that are indented, the curl commands. I do give a caution that you normally do not want to curl a shell script and run it. But in this case, with a virtual machine, you should not be worried about breaking it, because if you do, you could just reinstall the virtual machine. And these are also trusted resources from the actual languages, so it should be safe to run these, but I normally would not recommend doing that because it could contain malicious commands. And then we still got the resources at the end of all of these. We've got OCaml. OCaml, I give you two ways to install it because you can do a curl command like the ones above, or you could just use Pacman's package manager. Both are equally well suited. Go, which is Google's language, pretty easy to install and build with. Assembly is a family of languages, so if you want to do x86 or x64, which is what this virtual machine is, and almost certainly what your computer runs if you're not running the M1 or M2 Max, you can do it with GCC, so that's actually pre-built in, but you probably don't want to use GCC. You probably want to use NASM, N-A-S-M, or YASM, Y-A-S-M. Excuse me. I don't specifically show you how to download these here, but the reason these are not this is not in the pre-installed language is because I also have MIPS here, which is probably the language you're more interested in running. MIPS requires an emulator because your computer cannot run MIPS code directly, and MIPS is not supported on Arch, so you actually have to use the AUR to install SPIM, which is the IDE/emulator for MIPS programming. And then I put these both here because they're both assembly languages and they're both share resources. And in the resources, I also talk about RISC-V and ARM, which are other CPUs. Lisp is the next language family that's on this list. So you could either do Common Lisp Or I do put Scheme here, but I recommend you to download Racket instead, because Racket and Scheme are very, very closely related, and you could actually program Scheme in the Dr. Racket language, or the sorry, not the Dr. Racket language, the Dr. Racket IDE, or just the straight command line version. So Racket comes in two versions. You could either download the full package, which includes everything, or you could do a minimal install, which is just the terminal version of Racket. Both are equally valid, but that's how you could get Scheme or Racket. Clojure is a language that is also a Lisp dialect, but it is for the web, and I'm not too familiar with it, but I do put it here as an option, and you could read about it on the Arch Wiki if you want to download it. Standard ML is a meta language. That's what ML stands for. OCaml is also in this family, but it has it's significantly different than standard ML. Standard ML is easy to download with Arch, but specifically what I want to mention about this one is that Programming Languages Part A by Dan Grossman on Coursera is one of the best courses to learn functional programming. I highly recommend taking that course. There's also parts B and C, which teach you Racket and Ruby respectively. So if you really like Racket or Scheme, you could take part B of the course and learn a lot about programming languages and really understand what my presentation was trying to convey, but in a lot longer video series that has exercises you could practice. Next, we've got R, which is a data science language. One thing I want to point out here is that while it's easy to download R, you probably also want to get GCC Fortran, which is another language, and then install these packages within R. I don't normally recommend downloading packages for a language right off the bat, because you should get comfortable with the core language. But in my opinion, and in a lot of other experts' opinions, Tidyverse, Plotly, and I'll talk about these other two later, but these two specifically really should be part of the core language. They're just not for backwards compatibility reasons. But if you like the way my slideshow went, and if you like writing something once and then having multiple options for displaying it, like websites, slideshows, or PDF documents, you want knitr and R Markdown. This is what compiles your code into different formats. And then R Markdown you might not want to use, which I mentioned in this paragraph. Quattro is the new version of R Markdown. I am not too familiar with it, but it looks really cool, so I would actually recommend using Quattro. But R Markdown is what I use to make the slideshow, so it still works and it's still a really good resource. And then finally we've got Prolog. Prolog sadly has the same file extension as Perl. And like I said, it doesn't work with Starship, but it is a really cool language to learn, especially if you're interested in artificial intelligence and how to think about artificial intelligence. So I really recommend these resources, especially these two for artificial intelligence with Prolog. This last section is miscellaneous languages. These are languages I don't know too much about. What I do provide is the name of the language and the package you would use to download with Pacman. You'll notice in some lines like Ruby that there's two names here. You do want to type both with a space in between in Pacman, because on the left side will be the core language and on the right side will be the package manager. You want both just in case you want to explore the language more, but these are all the extra options that Arch Linux specifically supports on their programming languages webpage. I highly recommend checking that out in case they ever update it. There are, of course, thousands upon thousands of other languages, but these are the popular ones that are easy to get started with in Arch. I do recommend reading this entire document because there are probably tips in one section that I forgot to mention in a different part. One thing I do want to mention is that if you're in a REPL, and before we get there, just in case you didn't see what I did there, when you're in Vim, you'll notice that you can't type at all because you have to do the Vim tutor to really learn Vim. If you hold down or if you type the colon key, you'll notice that something popped up here. You could do plus tutor. Maybe that doesn't work. I think I just do tutor. You want to run through this tutorial on NVim to learn how this works. But we'll close out of that. And if you're in a REPL, like the Python environment, and you can't figure out how to get out or close it, what you want to do is hold down the control key and C. And if that doesn't work, if you get this keyboard interrupted, hold down the control key and the letter D to exit out of those. Other than that, I don't think there's really anything else to talk about for this virtual machine. If you have any questions, you could email me at austin.covington1@protonmail.com. But otherwise, I hope this virtual machine suits you in your learning journey for both programming and Linux. Thank you and have a nice day.